This is ADHD Rewired, episode number 6. This is the show designed to help those of us who have really good intentions, but a slightly wandering attention. Whether you have ADHD and you want to learn more about it, or you are looking for ways to organize your time, your things, or the many details of life so you can get more done, this show is for you. My name is Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, coach, and consultant. I am your host, and I told her on the first date I have ADHD. Well, we know that starting could be the hardest part, so let's get started. To share or not to share? That is the question. Or what was the question? Well, on today's episode, we will talk about coming out with ADHD. We'll talk about when to disclose and if we should disclose and how to do it. I'm going to share with you my personal experiences of coming out with ADHD and of disclosure. So this is the first episode that I'm recording since I've launched this podcast. So I wanted to let you know how things have been going and what I've been doing. And I also want to share a very important milestone with you. So we are going to hear from you today, the listener, and which is really exciting. And I'm also at the end of the show going to give you my app pick of the week. But before we get started, I do want to let you know that I am a bit under the weather and I have a bit of a cold. So my voice does sound a little nasally today. So I'm sorry about that. And hopefully it won't be too painful on your ears. Today, I want to respond to Ryan, who is from Wilmington, Delaware, and he's a college student studying social work. So shout out to fellow social work students. That's fantastic. And he emailed me, and in his email, he writes, I have trouble with dates and am working on trying to figure out a system to get things submitted on time. Should I tell my supervisor that I have ADHD? I don't want to make excuses, but sometimes my work can be overwhelming. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for this email. I can totally appreciate that feeling of overwhelm, and it sucks. You know, I do go through it. I go through it more than I wish that I did. You know, for me, it seems like it comes and goes in phases, and it all kind of depends on how many balls I seem to have in the air. What I do know is that the better that your executive functioning skills become and your life management skills are, and as they develop, that the less overwhelm you will feel handling the same amount of stuff. So, you know, I say that because as we develop skills to handle more, we take on more, and as we should. I think it's good. That's a good thing to push ourselves. But as we continue to learn and take on more of life's challenges, we do experience these feelings of overwhelm as we are learning new things. Ryan, in regards to your question about self-disclosure and if you should disclose your ADHD, like, a lot of what should I do type questions, the answer really is it depends. You know, I think in our field, you know, in the field of social work or any kind of mental health or even education field, I think there's generally more acceptance and compassion for individuals, you know, with what we call invisible disabilities, at least in comparison to the corporate world. Before you disclose, you know, I would really ask yourself a couple questions, and I sent you this in an email, but I want to share this with all the listeners. And I think I listed 6 or 7 questions here. As we learned from the last episode, listing, while it sounds really good, I seem to either add or miscount, but I think I have 7 on my list of questions that you should ask yourself before you think about disclosing at the workplace. So the first question I would ask yourself is, what am I hoping to achieve by disclosing? Is it because you need some accommodation? Is it because there's something that you really need? You know, what is the ultimate goal? So number 1 is, what am I hoping to achieve by disclosing? Number 2 is kind of a secondary thought to number one, and that is there any other way to achieve this other than disclosing? I think these two questions kind of go together because I think in most job environments, unfortunately, most people don't understand ADHD. So if you come out and just tell them that I have ADHD or that you have ADHD, whatever their preconceived notion of ADHD is, and chances are it's not accurate, that's the view that they're going to have of you. So you really want to think about, are there other ways to disclose, in a sense, what you need without disclosing that you have ADHD? So that's the second question I would ask yourself. The third question is, am I currently at risk of being fired? So this is a situation in which, maybe you've had several performance reviews and you're not making the adjustments that have been asked of you or that you said that you would make. At that point, that might be the time where you want to talk to your human resources department and talk to them about that. Even though we are protected under the law, just because we are protected under the law does not mean that that's what happens in real life. And I wish it wasn't that way, but that is how it is. And we have to learn how to live within that system if we are going to be working for somebody else. This is one of the reasons why I love being an entrepreneur and I love being self-employed, because I respond to each individual client that I work with, and I have those relationships and I negotiate those relationships based upon what I know I can provide for them. So I'm not going to overcommit and do something that I know that I won't be able to do. And so in a sense, it allows me in most situations to make my own rules. And so that's why I'm a huge advocate of self-employment when you have ADHD. The next question number 4 that you want to ask yourself before you consider disclosing is, do I know what accommodations I actually need to meet the demands and the expectations of the job? An accommodation at the workplace does not mean that you get less work. It just means setting up an accommodation to allow you to do the same work as everybody else, just possibly in a slightly different way. In school, when you're a student and you have an IEP or a 504 plan, some accommodations that are commonly used in schools don't actually equate to the real world. In the real world, while there is busy work, when you are performing at a higher level, we should really expect that we can minimize the amount of busy work we have. So in school, if, a common issue is too much homework for kids. And one example is with math. So let's say a kid has 30 math problems that he has to do, and he can demonstrate, and he's actually good at math and knows the skill. Why does he have to do 30 problems? If he can do it in 5 and get them correct, good for him. I think, sometimes we forget that sometimes less is more. And if you can demonstrate proficiency at something in 5 problems versus 30, that's actually better off. I mean, if you called a customer service center or asked someone for a report, would you rather read a paragraph that actually tells you everything you need to know, or 30 pages that tells you everything you need to know? Personally, we're all busy, and I think we would all rather have the shortened version. The other thing that's kind of weird is the idea that extended time is this accommodation. There's no research that actually shows extended time is an advantage to anybody. I think level the playing field by giving everybody extended time. And in the work world, there's very few things that we are actually pressured by the clock. We do have due dates, and that's really important. And I think, that is something that we need to learn how to make accommodations for, so you can meet those due dates. But as far as the 45-minute time that you have to take a test, I don't really see the value in that. Going back to What accommodations do you need? When you're a kid, these accommodations are often made for you, and which is kind of unfortunate because I think that students need to be just as much a part of their IEP plan. But as an adult, we need to know what works for us. And if we are going to be asking for accommodations, especially if we are going to self-disclose at the job, we need to be able to offer a number of suggestions for what your accommodations would be. We can't go to our boss and say, I have ADHD. Do you have any way you can help me? That's not appropriate, and they're not going to know what to do. You need to be able to meet the demands and expectations of the job. The accommodations that you might be able to get are things that will help you meet those expectations and the demands of the job. So number 5 is then, can I get these accommodations without disclosing? And if you can, that's the route that I think is the best route to take. So Ryan, going back to your question, you had asked, should I disclose to my supervisor? And I want to ask this question to you as well as everyone else listening who is thinking about this issue is, what's the relationship like that you have with your supervisor? Is it all business? Then you really want to probably be careful about self-disclosing. Is it both business and personal? Is there a good relationship where there is a good understanding? I think, and this podcast may be a perfect example of this, I think that people with ADHD sometimes over disclose. That's just my intuition. I don't have any evidence to kind of back that up. I do know that people with ADHD tend to suffer from a common disease known as foot-in-mouth disease, where they say something before thinking and now they just put their foot in their mouth. So, we really want to think through what is the goal of self-disclosure? What's the why behind it? All of that being said, I think being out of the closet with ADHD is great. Let me tell you something. It's a lot less stressful when you don't have to pretend to be normal, when you can just be you, and not that you're using it as an excuse, which was another part of your question, Ryan, and a lot of people have this, but that you're really maximizing what you're good at and you're working on what you're struggling with. So, and I know a lot of people really struggle with that. Going back though for just a second, I think that there is a time and a place for that to happen as far as being out with your ADHD. For some people, they never do self-disclose at the workplace and they don't have to. It's absolutely a whole lot easier to be an adult with ADHD than it is to be a kid with ADHD because we have a lot more choices. Imagine yourself as a kid looking at a job description in the classifieds. And this job description says, wanted, long-term contract, travel required, multiple bosses, bosses do not communicate with each other, working from home is expected. Would you want that job? So that's what kids do. And they have to do lots of stuff that they don't really want to do. And when you have ADHD, it can be almost impossible to get yourself to do something that is either boring or not interesting. The brain just kind of shuts down. On the other side, the brain lights up and you can really see the strengths within a person with ADHD when they are able to do things that they love, that they're passionate about, and that they're good at. So as adults, we have the ability to create that life around us. And that's why I believe it's a lot easier to be an adult with ADHD than it is to be a kid with ADHD. I'm not saying it's easy to be an adult with ADHD. I'm just saying it's easier because we have more choices about what we do and what we won't do. So addressing the issue that a lot of people struggle with, and Ryan, I think you said in your email that you don't want to use ADHD as an excuse. And of course you don't. And here's the thing, it's not an excuse, but it also depends on how you use it and how you communicate this with other people. So an example to help you understand what the difference is between an excuse and an explanation. So an excuse might sound something like, sorry, I can't be on time. I have ADHD. Just deal with it. Okay, that's an excuse, and no one's going to feel empathetic or compassionate. They're just going to be annoyed with you. Okay, so that's the excuse. The explanation may be something more like, I'm really sorry that I'm late again. I was hesitant to share this with you because I don't want to use this as an excuse, but I have ADHD and it's really, really hard for me to be on time. And here's actually some things that I'm doing to work on it. I've set 3 alarms and, I focused really hard on making sure I got here on time, and I'm still late. And it's not an excuse, and I'm still working on strategies. And I'm actually working with a coach because I know that this is not something that works for you in our relationship, and this doesn't work for me either. So I hope that you can understand. And if you have any more questions about this, please feel free to ask me. But I'm here, so let's get started. The other thing is, you could say I'm sorry, and I think you have to say I'm sorry. And there is a value to a good, sincere apology, but you can't just keep apologizing and not changing the behavior. So, and that's frustrating because I know that, you're listening to this and you're all probably sitting there thinking, well, yeah, I keep apologizing because I intend on being there on time, but I'm not. And that's frustrating. And that makes people frustrated with you. And I think even what makes it worse is you're frustrated with yourself. And I've been there before too. I still do those kinds of things sometimes. And it's so frustrating. I think that's the reason that, both kids and adults have kind of elements of some oppositional behavior or oppositional responses, because when someone's showing or expressing their disappointment in us, we get it. We're disappointed in ourselves. It's hard to explain why it seems impossible to get somewhere on time. It's beyond frustrating. So we internalize this sense of there's clearly something wrong with us. We're, maybe damaged goods, or, people think, oh, I must be stupid, or I don't care, or I'm lazy, and it's none of that, because we know that you are trying hard. One of the things that I think is so important when you live with ADHD is to embrace this philosophy and this belief. Stop trying harder. Start trying differently. Start trying different things. Keep trying different things until you find what works. Because you're right, ADHD is not an excuse. It's an explanation. And whether you've known you've had ADHD for a long time, or have recently been diagnosed, or you've always just kind of wondered if you have ADHD, or you've stumbled across this podcast because I also provide a lot of productivity tips. And I think that we have listeners who are here that are just interested in some productivity tips, because this is part of what this show is about. And as you're listening, you might be even wondering, a lot of what you're sounding kind of sounds like me. And let me tell you, that's more normal than you might even realize. So whatever your situation, whatever your thought is about this, if something isn't working, go to plan B. If plan B, it doesn't work, go to plan C. And here's the thing. After plan C, there's 23 more letters in the alphabet. So don't give up. So I said I wanted to tell you a little bit about my kind of history of self-disclosure. So 2 jobs ago, I came out at my job. I worked at a residential treatment center. I was a clinical program manager. I was running a group home for kids that had significant cognitive disabilities, and most of them had an autism diagnosis, amongst other presenting diagnoses. I was working in the nonprofit sector in a service job, and there was a lot of paperwork involved. Now, one thing that I want to mention too is that when I interviewed for this job, I also interviewed them and I asked about the paperwork because I know that paperwork and me don't really get along. One of the things that I will say is that I have a pretty significant allergy to paperwork. I tend to break out in piles and procrastination. 2 jobs ago, I was working at this residential facility and I became so behind on my paperwork because I'm working in a place that, we're working with individuals with disabilities. So there is some more awareness about disabilities and more compassion. I did tell my boss that I had ADHD. And one of the things that we came up with was to be able to have more frequent check-ins regarding paperwork. So instead of the report that she wants me to get to her whenever, I would actually ask her to give me a date to even have parts of it into her by, and would break it down. Another thing that we did is that I was allowed to work in an office that was really kind of removed from all kinds of distractions. So that was also helpful. So that was 2 jobs ago. The job that I had before starting my own practice, Tivers Clinical Specialties, I came out actually ahead of having problems. Part of this was I had a good relationship with my supervisor. When I talked to her about it, one of the ways that I asked for the accommodations, or the reason I asked for accommodations, was the planning area all the therapists had. We were in this back room that had cubicles, and we were expected to do all of our planning and our paperwork and our phone calls in a shared environment that just had cubicles. And because I have a lot of auditory processing issues, I cannot talk on the phone when somebody else is around. I can't write when somebody else is around. So I don't have that ability to kind of filter that out. So the accommodation that I asked for was, can I work in the conference room when it's not being used? Because I'm having a hard time getting my work done working in the cubicle space. And that wasn't a problem. So, I felt comfortable asking her, and it was not something that created any kind of extra work for anybody else. And because I worked with kids who, were kind of the younger versions of myself, all the other therapists got it too. And it wasn't something that was unfair. I even had other clinicians who would come to the conference room and do work quietly with me because they had some of the same issues. So, I think it so depends on your work environment. We know that individuals with ADHD have some life outcomes that, when compared to individuals without ADHD, they're just not as good. We know that individuals with ADHD tend on average to earn less, to have less satisfying jobs and home lives, and a lot of other factors that have been self-rated by people with ADHD. Now, the reason I actually bring this up, because I want you to understand that just having ADHD does not make all those factors a self-fulfilling prophecy. When I was in grad school, one of the things that I studied and was interested in was teaching self-awareness, self-advocacy skills, and self-determination to students who had disabilities like ADHD or other learning disabilities. And in the course of my research, one of the things that I learned that it is not the disability, whether it's ADHD or a learning disability, it is not this that impacts a person's ability to achieve successful outcomes and have higher indications on quality of life. Here's what it is. It is a person's self-awareness. It is a person's self-advocacy skills and their self-determination. These 3 factors, research shows, makes all the difference in the world when determining life outcomes for people like you and me. So it's not the ADHD that will prevent us from being as successful as we want to be. It is lack of self-awareness, lack of self-advocacy skills, and lack of self-determination. That's what keeps us from living that intentional life that helps us achieve the goals that we are really aiming for. I didn't plan this section in my show notes, but I want to discuss this really quickly. For kids, and if you're a parent who has a child with ADHD, and if you are a parent with ADHD, we know that chances are pretty good that you have a child with ADHD. Statistically speaking, that there is a 40 to 70% heritability rate with ADHD. So if mom or dad has it, we know that there's a 40 to 70% chance that your child will have it. So the reason I am bringing this up in the context of self-disclosure and self-determination, when it comes to getting accommodations for students, I think it's critically important for students to learn how to self-advocate for what they need. So before you self-advocate for yourself, you need to have a good sense of self-awareness and know how to communicate that with others. In my practice, when I'm working with kids, really as young as second and third grade, I will help them understand what their diagnosis is if they have a diagnosis of something. And I will help them develop strategies on how they can communicate to their teacher what the challenge that they are having is and how to ask for accommodations. And you will get, and your students, your child will get more accommodations this way based on relationships than they will based on what is documented in that legal document of an IEP. When I was in college, I did have accommodations set up through the Office of Disability Services at Bradley. But let me tell you something. I think I used them once because when I took a test, I wanted to be able to be in the class and ask the professor a question if I had one. So what I did before classes started at each semester is I met and talked with my professors, and I met with them often, and they knew who I was. So, I learned that by communicating effectively with professors, I was able to get all the accommodations that I needed and more. So I think when it comes to academia, whether you're a grammar school student, grade school, middle school, or high school, I think that self-disclosure is really important. I think in college and even graduate school and beyond, I also think that self-disclosure can be very important because they can't kick you out of a class because you tell your teacher you have ADHD. This all changes, though, when you are in the work world. While they technically can't fire you if you disclose you have ADHD, we know that in the work world, what's legal and what actually happens may be two different things. So, Ryan, I want to thank you again for your question. I hope this was a helpful response, and I hope that this helped other people who are listening. I hope this also helped you if this was an issue that you are having. If you have another issue or have a question that you want to ask me and want to share it on the show, go to my webpage, ADHDrewired.com, and there are a few different options that will allow you to share a question that you have with me. I recently added a widget on my website called, now I'm forgetting what it's called. I think it's SpeakPipe. SpeakPipe. So there's a little widget on my website called SpeakPipe. And what this actually does is you click a button and you can actually record a message that will be sent to me via email just using your computer microphone. You don't have to have any special microphone. If you are, if you want to have it sound really good and have a little bit of a better microphone, that'd be awesome, but totally not necessary. You have a 90-second window to ask your question, and if you ask it, I will play it on the show. You can make up a name if you would like to. I actually would think it'd be kind of cool to do that because I think that if we think about creating a rewired name for a few reasons. One, I want to be able to respect your privacy if that is something that you're concerned about. So I understand if you don't want to use your name. So you can make up a name and have fun with it if you want to. That is completely up to you. Just know that other people will hear you. The other ways that you can communicate and share your question with me is on my webpage, ADHD Rewired. You can ask me a question through the email template. And that's how, I think this is how Ryan asked me his question. I will love to answer more questions on upcoming episodes. So I want to give you a couple updates. I want to send out some thank yous to a few people who have left me some really nice reviews on iTunes. The first one I want to read comes from Dr. Kim. I'm getting reviews from doctors. That's cool. So Dr. Kim says, learning about the ins and outs of ADHD from an ADHD therapist who has ADHD is so helpful for me as a doctor. A lot of times you don't know exactly what your patient may need, and Eric's advice has been great so far. Thanks, Kim. That's awesome. DTrain405 writes, my wife and I listened to this podcast together and found it very helpful. I just added the word podcast. He didn't actually write podcast. I'm going to keep going. We need more people like this in the world. Thanks, D-Train. And let's see. L White 267 writes, how refreshing to learn about ADHD from a professional provider who has firsthand experience with the disorder. It is very courageous of Eric to share his personal story. It adds credence to his many insights. It adds credence to his many insights and helpful suggestions. I look forward to learning more about ADHD from Eric in future podcasts. So thank you for those reviews. It really does help when you leave a review. It helps people find this show, which I think if you're listening now, I'm hoping that you're finding it helpful. So one of the things that I actually wanted to share with you guys is, so I'm kind of a technology guy, and each episode I'm going to make some technology suggestions and recommendations, whether it's an app or something like that. The ironic thing is I was kind of late to the party when it comes to Facebook. I really just didn't do anything on Facebook for years because I kind of didn't understand it. So I recently got onto Facebook because there's a podcasting group that I'm actually a part of that has been helping me kind of get my podcast launched, called Podcasters Paradise. There's a closed group that I'm a part of, and that's kind of helped me learn Facebook. Well, I know I'm kind of late to the party, but whoa, Facebook's kind of addicting. And I am going to have to implement some strategies to limit my time on Facebook because I keep checking it. I'm a part of a number of different Facebook groups for both podcasting and for ADHD and some other kind of interests. I can now understand why people are always checking their status updates. And I really don't want to be one of those people. Over the last week or two since I've launched, I've totally have been one of those people. So I'll kind of figure out how that goes for me. But you can like my Facebook page, which is just ADHD Rewired. And like me on Facebook, send me comments. I think that's how it works. I'm clearly still learning how this whole Facebook thing works. I used to think it was just this absurd kind of thing, but with the groups and everything, I really see the value. Now it's time for my tech tool of the week. Last week's episode, I was talking about the importance of capturing everything, and it occurred to me that I did not even mention the Live Scribe Smart Pen. Now, if you've never seen one of these Live Scribe Smart Pens, you gotta go check this out. It's like a regular pen where you use a special kind of paper that is digitally encoded, but the really cool thing about this is each piece of paper has a little record button, and it has an optical, recorder that as you're writing, it records what's being said as you are writing it. If you're in a meeting, you can be taking notes, and when you tap on what you wrote, it will play back what was being said at the time that you wrote it. I wish that I had one of these tools when I was in college. I think that would have changed a lot of things for me. And even in school as a high school student, I think that would change a lot. You could find affiliate links to the LiveScribe Smart Pen. And I'll also put a link to a really cool YouTube video that will really help you get the gist of what this pen is all about. You can also upload your notes to Evernote and capture things that way as well. So that's my tech tip of the week. Last thing, I said at the beginning of the show that I wanted to talk to you about a really important milestone that I am coming up on. And in some ways, this milestone has nothing to do with you, but in a lot of ways, this milestone are one of the reasons that I'm here talking with you. And that milestone is, and I also said in my intro that I told her on the first date I had ADHD. Well, that first date led to lots more dates, and we are about to celebrate our 5-year anniversary. So I want to publicly say to my wife, who I love, so babe, I love you, and thank you for accepting me for who I am, and I love living this life with you. You're the best. Until next time. Well, podcast listeners, you have just listened to the 6th episode of ADHD Rewired. You know what that means. You finished what you started. Well done. Take a bow. Unless you're driving, then seriously keep your eyes on the road. Distracted driving can be fatal, and we know a thing or two about distractions. I mean, there's a whole book about it. You know, Driven by Distraction. It's a good book. Oh, okay, but I don't actually think it's about driving. But it was the first book I ever read about ADHD. I know of another book about ADHD that talks about driving called Taking Charge of ADHD. See show notes for affiliate links and other shiny resources mentioned on today's episode. Speaking of taking charge, I'd love to hear from you. Do you want your question or comment to be featured on this show? You can contact me through my website, ADHDrewired.com. Click on the microphone icon that says something like Ask Eric to record your voice, or email me through the website. You guys have been amazing at helping ADHD Rewired stay shiny at the top of iTunes. Your reviews helped this show get to number 4 in science and medicine, number 7 in self-help, and at one point, we were on the first page of New and Noteworthy, meaning top 20 of all new podcasts on iTunes. When I saw that, I jumped out of my seat faster than a kid with ADHD lines up for recess after math class. Your reviews and ratings are clearly helping people find this show. So a big thank you to those who've rated and those who are about to rate ADHD Rewired on iTunes. I am now also on Stitcher and SoundCloud. If you leave a rating on iTunes, could you multiply the love by copying your review and pasting it in Stitcher and SoundCloud? I think you can review on SoundCloud. Anyways, don't forget to go to ADHDrewired.com for links, tips, and more. You can sign up for my email newsletter, and I promise I will send it to you much less than I actually intend on sending it to you. Sign up at my website or text TIVERS to 22828. That's TIVERS to the number 22828. This is Eric Tivers reminding you, in the words of something I found on Pinterest that the author did not cite, sometimes the bad things that happen in our lives put us directly on the path to the best things that will ever happen to us.